Now, I of course know there are people out there who take exception anytime I or anyone else says that Star Wars needs saving or that the fandom is in trouble, and they'll go on to say that it's only a very small vocal minority of man babies causing all the fuss or boycotting, and some will even go so far as to say that most of this vocal minority are bigots anyway, so why even bother listening to anything they have to say? And that narrow minded view by some, which for whatever reason often gets echoed by the mainstream media, is actually part of the reason why Star Wars is indeed in some degree of trouble right now. Because even though we're all fans of the same franchise, we see each other as enemies just because we have a disagreement about one or more aspects of the franchise. And by no means am I placing all the blame on those who defend The Last Jedi or Disney Star Wars in general, because there are certainly plenty of people who didn't like The Last Jedi that go way too far with their hatred or attacking of other people who simply enjoyed a movie. In reality here, and people on both sides of this debate forget this little truth, but we're all entitled to our own opinions, or at least we should be. Problem is that doesn't seem to be the case with The Last Jedi, especially for those who disliked it, because they don't seem to be allowed to dislike it for their own reasons. Instead, they're all too often told their reasons are either wrong or invalid somehow, or that they're not understanding the movie and need it to be explained to them further because it's apparently too deep or complex for them. Even though sometimes other defenders of The Last Jedi will go to the opposite extreme and say that those who complain about some of the plot holes or other problems in The Last Jedi are being too critical because these movies are, after all, meant for kids. And yet somehow these kids' movies are too complex for some adults to fully grasp. Worse yet, though, is when people have their legitimate gripes and complaints against The Last Jedi itself, or the characters within, completely dismissed and are told they're trying to hide the fact that they're actually racist or sexist, and that's the real reason why they didn't like the movie. Or maybe they're told the only reason they didn't like it is because it wasn't exactly what they wanted it to be. And by complaining about it, you're not allowing the artist to express themselves and the story they wanted to tell. But here's the thing about all of that. You can dislike The Last Jedi for whatever reason you want. You can dislike it because you thought the story was bad, or you can dislike it because you wanted more porgs and thought they should be the focus of the entire movie. And yes, if you want, you can hate The Last Jedi solely based off the way Luke Skywalker's character was handled. There's no law or rule that says what criteria the individual viewer must judge a movie on. If it's your reason for not liking the movie, then so be it. You can't be wrong when it comes to personal taste. The same way I can't and won't say that you're wrong if Luke was the reason why you liked the movie. That your favorite aspect of The Last Jedi is that Luke was portrayed in a different or more human way. And a lot of people do say that very thing, that they loved the movie because of what was done with Luke. And though I may disagree that that's the way he would end up, I can't say you're wrong for liking the movie because of it. And by now you might be wondering, what does any of this have to do with J.J. Abrams versus Rian Johnson? Well, everything actually, considering, like it or not, it's now up to J.J. Abrams to perhaps try and put the fan base back together, and to mend the rift that formed mainly due to Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi. And I say mainly because yes, there are obviously those who didn't like The Force Awakens, and haven't liked anything Disney Star Wars. But I think, for the most part, people liked The Force Awakens, or were at least intrigued enough to genuinely want to know what happens next. And yes, I also know some people want to place the blame for The Last Jedi on J.J. Abrams, who they believe went a little too far with the mystery box approach and painted Rian Johnson into a corner, especially in regards with what he could do with Luke Skywalker. In fact, Rian Johnson has said that pretty much the hardest thing he had to figure out was why Luke was on that island, why he would exile himself. And being disenfranchised with the Jedi seemed about the only reason that made sense to him, which honestly does make me wonder if he's seen any other Star Wars movies, because both Yoda and Obi-Wan also went into exile, but it wasn't because they'd given up, they did it for the opposite reason, to bet on the future. And to try and be fair here, and in Rian Johnson's defense, maybe he didn't want to go with that approach again. He didn't want Luke to be another Grandmaster waiting for a student to train. In other words, he didn't want him to be another Obi-Wan or Yoda, and I do get that. I do get wanting to surprise people or subvert their expectations and do something new and different. There's nothing inherently wrong with a shocking or unexpected moment, or even 2 or 3 of them. However, when you seem to almost make it your mission to subvert every expectation, it comes off almost as condescending, or like you're saying you really don't care what the fans want at all, especially when you do such things as tell fans their Snoke theory sucks, which implies yours is going to be much better. But of course, we never learned anything about Snoke. We weren't even given one well-placed line of dialogue to give us a clue about his origin, and I've argued in other videos why his identity is important, so I won't get into it here. But Snoke was hardly the only thing from The Force Awakens that got essentially ignored. The Knights of Ren are another example of something people were very excited to learn more about, but Rian Johnson said he just couldn't find a place for them in his movie. And then you have characters like Phasma or Maz Kanata, who, by the way they were used, I'm guessing he was told had to be somewhere in his movie. And this is where we really start to see or understand the different approaches by J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson. Love or hate J.J. Abrams or The Force Awakens, you can tell he tried to make a movie for the fans. Maybe too much so, you could argue. And some fans have called his movie glorified fan fiction or just a love letter to Star Wars. And I won't entirely disagree with either of those claims, but I can at the very least appreciate that he was trying to make the best damn Star Wars movie he could, something all fans would hopefully enjoy. I have no doubt while watching The Force Awakens that JJ has a deep love and appreciation for Star Wars, and he only wanted to give the fans the movie they've been waiting for a very long time. On the other hand, Rian Johnson, unless he truly is an absolute idiot, had to know that The Last Jedi was going to anger a lot of fans and that it would divide the fan base. When I watch the movie, I don't get any type of sense that the guy behind it has any interest whatsoever in appeasing fans, which some would argue is a good approach. However, this movie is for fans of Star Wars. It's meant to be something that as many fans as possible will enjoy and want to spend their money on, both in terms of seeing it again and again, and wanting to buy the merchandise that goes along with it. Yet Rian Johnson is clearly not taking the approach of mass appeal, which again is something you can personally appreciate and enjoy about this movie. But I'd argue that's not what he's being paid to do. Instead, he's being paid a lot of money to make a movie that will fit in with a long-standing franchise, and again, will make as many fans of that franchise as possible happy and to want to spend their money on it. And if you think I'm way off base here and that Rian Johnson was trying to make the best Star Wars movie he could, one that all fans would enjoy, I'd point to an old interview of him saying that the type of movies he wants to make are the kind that one group really loves and another group really hates. In his opinion, that's the mark of a great movie. And to Rian Johnson, I say congratulations, because by your standards and yours alone, you made the greatest movie in history. And in the process, you did harm to a long-standing and much beloved franchise that now J.J. Abrams has to attempt to fix. But here's the real problem for J.J. Abrams with Episode 9, a problem he didn't face with 7, and that is that there is no longer any type of unified fanbase. There are now several different subgroups within the fanbase, all of which have different hopes and aspirations for this movie. You have some that want to see the story Rian Johnson told in Episode 8 carried forward entirely. You then have a group of fans that hope JJ will make some minor or even major changes or retcons, like bringing back Snoke for example, or changing Rey's parents. You have others who want JJ to retcon everything from The Last Jedi, and have it where Finn wakes up from a coma and that movie was just a dream. And then you have others still who hope Episode 9 is a complete and utter failure, in the hopes that it shakes up the management at Lucasfilm. And I'd have to imagine that J.J. Abrams has been given a directive from the higher-ups at Disney to do whatever he has to do with this movie to begin to fix the franchise that Disney spent $4 billion on. To back this up, Bob Iger, CEO of Disney, recently announced that they'll be slowing down with the Star Wars movies and being more careful with their decision-making process, which is probably about the closest thing to them admitting some mistakes were made with this franchise that we'll ever get. Going under that assumption, I'd then have to believe that J.J. Abrams, whose Episode 7 was well received by most, but of course not all fans, has free reign to do whatever he feels he must to make another movie that pleases a vast majority of the fanbase, even if it means, within the context of the story of course, retconning some aspects of The Last Jedi. Though, of course, doing that runs the risk of now angering those who did like The Last Jedi. And the irony will of course be if Episode 9 subverts expectations and brings back Snoke or changes Rey's lineage somehow, it'll be the people who liked Episode 8, those who defended that subversion of expectations in that movie, who will now be the ones upset and will likely cry foul. Either that or they'll stick to their guns and say that artistic freedom is the most important thing, and if this is the story J.J. Abrams wanted to tell, we should just accept it. And no, I'm not really trying to be an ass here towards those who love The Last Jedi. I'm trying to point out that having your expectations subverted can be a legitimate reason to dislike a movie or be disappointed by it. For example, if the next Avengers movie has nothing to do with Thanos, that'd certainly subvert my expectations, but it more than likely wouldn't make for a good movie, and it'd be a fair reason to criticize it, because we're all expecting it to be about him. Just like people who waited some 35 years to see Luke Skywalker in action again have every right to be upset when the character is treated the way he was in The Last Jedi, a way that is nothing like they'd hoped for or imagined for a very long time. And honestly, I don't think Luke giving up was what JJ had in mind when he wrote The Force Awakens. After all, originally, when Rey finds Luke at the end of the movie, Luke was going to be meditating with rocks floating around him, which means he was clearly still using the Force. But Rian Johnson asked him to change that ending. We also know, thanks to a Daisy Ridley interview, that apparently J.J. Abrams wrote a script or rough draft for Episode 8 that Rian Johnson completely threw out, which begins to highlight probably the greatest problem with the sequel trilogy, a lack of a shared vision. And I know what some of you are going to say, that there is no lack of a shared vision, and J.J. Abrams has even come out and said that he liked The Last Jedi, not to mention he was credited as an executive producer on it. But let's keep a few things in mind about that, like the fact that Lord and Miller are credited as executive producers on Solo, despite being unceremoniously fired late in filming. Stan Lee also gets credited as an executive producer on all Marvel movies, simply for appearing in the movies and allowing them to use his name. Also, due to this arrangement, Stan Lee agrees to speak favorably about all Marvel movies. In other words, he's given the credit of executive producer in exchange for endorsement. He in no way, shape, or form has any say over the movies whatsoever. And no, I'm not trying to say that J.J. Abrams had absolutely zero say or input, but again, we have Daisy Ridley saying that Rian Johnson tossed out everything J.J. had written for 8. We also have Daisy saying in the same interview, that I'll link in the description below, that each director is given free rein to basically do what they want with their own movie. Which means Rian Johnson didn't have to listen to anything J.J. Abrams said, or adhere to anything he was trying to set up in the previous movie. Which begs the question, why then would J.J. say he liked The Last Jedi? Well, for one, he again got an executive producer credit on the movie, and he's a smart guy, smart enough, if not contractually obligated to, say good things about the movie no matter how he may actually feel. Because he has to realize that if he had said anything bad about it, even if on the inside he hates everything about it, he'd never again get the chance to make another Star Wars movie or work for Disney, the biggest name in the industry. And simply based off the fact that he is now at the helm of Episode 9, means he knows how to play ball with Disney. And yes, I do acknowledge that there's every chance that he really does love The Last Jedi, just like there's every chance he hates it with every fiber of his existence, and the real reason he decided to do Episode 9 was to stick it to Rian Johnson and reclaim the story he started. Most likely though, his feelings probably fall somewhere in the middle of these two extremes, and if I had to guess, I'd say he's a little resentful right now. Now why do I say that? Because as someone who enjoys to tell a story, it would be frustrating to start one and then have someone else come in and take it in a radically different direction than I'd originally intended. Even if I thought the direction they took it in was a good one, I'd still harbor some level of frustration, as most people would. And considering the amount of drive and ambition it takes to get to where J.J. Abrams is today, I'd assume he has himself quite an ego and isn't pleased that the setup that was his Episode 7 got mostly ignored by Rian Johnson's Episode 8. Finally here, I'm going to reiterate that it really all comes down to money. If I was in charge of Disney and I had shareholders asking me why so many fans seem upset about Star Wars right now and why Solo was a financial failure, I tell the guy helming the next movie to do what it takes to make things right. And I honestly think and believe that JJ's going to do whatever he can to make the best damn Star Wars movie he can. Which I don't think was the goal of Rian Johnson with Episode 8. I'm sorry, but I really don't feel that way. I think he was only concerned about making what he thought was going to be a good movie, based, again, on his own standards. And once again, those standards are creating a movie that some people very much enjoy and others very much hate, and that sums up The Last Jedi perfectly. Anyway, I know a lot of people out there don't like J.J. Abrams or his work, and I wouldn't say I'm his biggest fan either, but I do have high hopes that he can pull off something special with Episode 9, that he can make a movie that a vast majority of the fans will enjoy and even rally behind. And I think he does that by hearkening back to some of the lore set up in the first two trilogies, and by playing off some of the ideas I think he was setting up in Episode 7, and also by working around some of the things Rian Johnson did in Episode 8 the best he can, without flat out looking like he's trying to reject its place in the story. And the real danger here is, of course, if he does do something like this, if he does in a sense reject The Last Jedi, it'll not only anger the fans of The Last Jedi and chase them away, but he also won't lure back in the fans right now who say they're done with Star Wars, those who likely still have some hope buried inside of them and really want to come back to the franchise. And no matter where in this argument you may fall, or how you may feel about the Disney era of Star Wars, I think all fans have to admit that there is a lot riding on Episode 9. And when it's all said and done, I think we're going to look back and say that JJ tried to make the best damn movie he could, given what he had to work with. And that, as dramatic as it may sound, Episode 9 will either be the movie that helped save the franchise, or the one that failed to. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Is the greatest issue with the sequel trilogy, at its core, a lack of a shared vision between those writing and directing these episodes? Or is it something else entirely? Let me know in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.